There are evenings when a tavern seems to gather the whole night beneath its roof. Outside, the road may be silver with frost, the hill paths hard as old iron, and the stars so distant that a traveler wonders whether they offer any light at all. But inside, there is bread beneath a cloth, a low fire settling into red coals, and the quiet music made by people who no longer feel obliged to fill every silence. A spoon touches the bottom of a bowl. A chair gives a small complaint beneath a shifting shoulder. Somewhere near the door, wet wool dries by degrees. It was on such an evening that one of the candles began to smoke. There was nothing remarkable about the candle itself. It stood in a shallow pewter dish near the end of the long table, no taller than a thumb above its pool of wax. Its flame did not leap. No draught moved through the room. Yet from the little golden point rose a narrow grey thread, and instead of climbing toward the rafters, it bent beneath the nearest beam. The smoke spread there in delicate lines. One curved toward the chimney, another doubled back above the table. Smaller branches appeared and faded at their edges, until the youngest carter in the room looked up from his cup and said that it resembled roads seen from a high hill. An older traveler disagreed. He said they were rivers. The innkeeper, polishing a cup that needed no more polishing, said they looked like cracks in winter ice, and advised them not to read too much into a poor wick. Then a woman seated near the fire lifted her eyes and said, very softly, that it might be a map of the stars. That quieted the room, for a map of roads may be tested by walking them, and a map of rivers by following the water. But a map of the stars leads to places where no foot can go. It asks a different sort of trust from the one who reads it. The storyteller beside the hearth watched the gray pattern gather beneath the beam. He did not claim that it was a sign. He did not claim that it was merely soot. He waited until the candle had burned down a little farther, then rested both hands upon the head of his walking stick. There was once a man, he said, who spent nearly 40 years drawing the sky, and near the end of those years, the smoke from a single candle showed him a road he had never seen. And the storyteller began. The city of Alderwick stood upon 3 hills above a wide green valley. The western hill carried the walls and gates, the market squares, the guild houses, and most of the tiled roofs. The southern hill belonged to gardens, sheep walks, and the long stone channels that guided water down from the uplands. The northern hill was the narrowest and highest. There, where the wind had room to speak, stood the Tower of Hours. It was not the tallest tower in the world, nor even the tallest in that part of the country. Its grey stones had weathered unevenly, and moss filled the carved numbers around its lower door. Yet every inhabitant of Alderwick knew its voice. A bell within the square middle chamber marked dawn, noon, sunset, and the closing of the gates. Above the bell chamber, a smaller round room held the clockwork that governed the striking. Above that was the observatory, where narrow windows opened to every direction, and a shallow dome turned on a ring of oaken rollers. For 38 years, Aldrin Mere had been the keeper of that tower. He had arrived as a thin young man with more patience than money, and had grown old among brass circles, wax tablets, water clocks, and tables filled with careful numbers. He had watched the summer stars drift westward over tiled roofs. He had measured the small changes in the moon's rising. He had recorded the first evening each year when the bright star called the lantern stood directly above the southern gate. The people of Alderwick did not gaze at the heavens only for beauty. The city's calendar rested upon the keeper's work. The opening of the upper water channels, the beginning of the spring fair, the changing of night watches, the counting of certain rents, and the days on which upland shepherds moved their flocks were all set with help from the annual table of measures. Weather might alter a plan. Snow might remain longer than expected, or rain arrive early. Still, the table gave the city a common place from which to begin. Each winter, Aldrin prepared it. Each spring, the council placed its seal beneath his name. The table he began that final winter was meant to be his last. He had told no one so plainly, but the intention was present in all his movements. He sorted old instruments into boxes and tied labels to their handles. He gave away 2 cloaks he no longer wore. He asked the carpenter to repair the small cupboard beside the eastern window, though the loose hinge had not troubled him in 20 years. He began writing explanations beside calculations that he alone had once needed to understand. His assistant, Mara Fenn, noticed these things and said nothing at first. Mara was 24, with dark hair. She usually bound at the nape of her neck an ink that seemed permanently settled along the side of her middle finger. She had come to the tower 6 years earlier as a copyist. Before that, she had helped her father measure roof beams and count tiles for repairs. Aldrin had discovered that she could look at a crooked row of slate and tell which roof rib had shifted beneath it. More importantly, she could explain how she knew without pretending that instinct was proof. He had taught her to read the great brass circles of the observatory. She had learned to time. A star crossing a marked wire, to correct a water clock for cold, and to copy long columns of figures without allowing her eyes to drift from one line to another. Aldrin trusted her with every instrument in the tower. He did not yet trust her with the final judgment of what those instruments meant. That winter, the first snow came early and vanished in 3 days. The second came quietly and remained in shadowed places. By the time Aldrin began the new table, the valley was white along its edges, while the river still moved dark and broad through the center. On the first morning of work, Mara climbed the spiral stair carrying a covered cup of hot barley water in one hand and a bundle of blank paper in the other. She found Aldrin at the western desk, holding a brass divider above a chart. He had not heard her enter. The divider trembled slightly between his fingers. He lowered one point toward the mark for the shepherd's star, paused, and placed it a little to the left. Mara set down the paper. "That mark belongs on the other side of the line," she said. Aldrin looked up. He had a long, kindly face, though years of squinting had drawn stern creases between his brows. "Does it? I took the lower ink stain for the point." He spoke of the day's work instead. The old observations must be compared, the water clock tested, the new figures entered before noon. They worked until the city bell sounded beneath them. Its first stroke entered through the stones as much as through the air. On the second, dust stirred at the edges of a shelf. On the third, the brass rings hanging from the wall gave a sympathetic hum. By the 12th stroke, Aldrin had copied the same figure twice. Mara placed a scrap of paper over the second entry. "The light is poor," she said. "The light has been poor every winter since the tower was built." When she turned back, he had removed a pair of glass lenses from a leather case. He held them before one eye and studied the page. The lenses had belonged to a visiting physician who claimed that polished glass could lengthen the useful life of sight. Aldrin had mocked the phrase at the time. Now he used the lenses whenever he believed Mara was looking elsewhere. "Master," she said. "Mara. Most simply do not know which one it is." In another, he explained with great sorrow that the council would never appoint someone of her age. In a third, which she disliked but could not dismiss, he admitted that he had already recommended a stranger. He only returned the glass to its case. "A final table should be a clean one," he said. "Let us give them no reason to remember my arithmetic more than the sky." They measured at dusk when the sky was clear. They calculated by daylight. Tobin Rusk, the city clockmaker, climbed to the tower twice to oil the gear that governed the sunset bell, and once more because Aldrin claimed the bell was striking a breath too slowly. Tobin was broad in the shoulders, red in the cheeks, and permanently disappointed by anything that could not be opened with a screwdriver. He listened to the mechanism, adjusted nothing, and declared that if the bell was late, then perhaps the sun ought to be questioned. "The sun is not under contract to the council," Aldrin replied. a convenient arrangement. Her father's house stood near the eastern wall, but since his death, she had rented a narrow room above a cooper's workshop, closer to the tower. From its window, she could see the observatory dome rising beyond the roofs. Some nights a lamp glowed behind one of its shutters long after she had descended. She wondered whether Aldrin stayed because his work demanded it, or because leaving the tower had begun to feel like leaving himself. Then came a week of clouds. The sky closed over Alderwick from hill to hill. Snow fell in grains too fine to make a sound. Without stars to measure, Aldrin and Mara turned to older tables, repairing bindings and comparing entries from previous winters. On the fourth day, a boy from the hill. Abby delivered a box of candles. The Abbey's bees fed on lavender and late heather, and their wax burned pale and slowly. Each year, the brothers sent 6 candles for the observatory, not as payment or offering, but because a keeper, 2 generations before Aldrin had taught an abbot to measure the slope of the abbey roof. The candles were wrapped in linen and separated by twists of straw. Mara signed the delivery slate. Aldrin opened the box and lifted one candle toward the window. "Uneven," he said. It was scarcely uneven at all. "We can send it back if the stars require straighter walks. That is one of their better qualities." Aldrin was reading an entry from 37 years earlier. He held the glass lens close to the page and frowned. Mara copied figures beside him. For several minutes, nothing occurred beyond the small domestic sounds of work: a page turning, a pen scratching, the soft knock of wood contracting in the cold. Then the candle gave a quiet hiss. Mara looked up. The flame remained steady. Above it, smoke rose in a thin line. She reached for the snuffer, thinking the wick had split, but Aldrin caught her wrist. "Wait!" Fine threads opened around it, like streams branching from a river. Mara stepped back. The brass holder stood well away from the wall, and every shutter was closed. She wet one finger and held it near the flame. The air did not move. The smoke climbed to the white plaster beneath the dome. There it spread. At first, Mara saw only confusion: pale loops, dark knots, and drifting edges. Then one dark point appeared above the northern window. Another formed nearer the dome's center. 5 smaller points curved between them. She knew that curve. "The crown," she whispered. Aldrin had already risen. He stared upward without the glass, his face tilted toward the smoke. To the west of the crown appeared the 3 stars of the shepherd's staff. South of them, a loose scattering became the field of wheat. The smoke did not merely resemble constellations. It placed them in relation to one another, complete with the blank intervals that ordinary artists shortened for convenience. The whole winter sky unfolded beneath the dome. Yet it was not the winter sky they knew. The lantern stood too far east. The crown leaned at an unfamiliar angle, and between the field of wheat and the long shape called the sleeping fox, the smoke left a narrow, curving road of empty plaster bordered by dim points. Mara's heart beat quickly, though nothing in the room felt threatening. The candle flame was small. The tower stones were familiar. Snow whispered against the shutters. "Do you see the dark path?" she asked. Aldrin did not answer. The smoke thickened along the curve. For an instant, a single bright gap appeared at its end, as if the map marked a star by refusing to cover it. Then the candle went out. The smoke map loosened at once. "Paper," Aldrin said. Mara seized the nearest sheet. Not that, the large roll. Aldrin relit the candle. It burned without smoke. He pinched the wick, trimmed it with a small knife, and tried again. The flame rose cleanly. Above them, the map was already fading. The outer constellations dissolved first. The crown lost 2 points. The curve between the field and the fox became a blur. Mara climbed the short ladder that reached the dome ring. With charcoal in one hand She began copying what remained. She marked the crown, the lantern, the shepherd's staff, and the blank path. Aldrin stood below, calling distances from memory. The eastern point was nearer the meridian. The last smoke disappeared before they finished. What remained on the survey paper was an awkward assembly of points, circles, and hurried lines. Mara had drawn the unknown path darker than the rest. At its end, she left an empty ring. They stood on opposite sides of the table. "Soot behaves strangely in winter," Aldrin said at last. "Not that strangely. We have worked beneath those marks for years. A wandering thread of smoke might make patterns the mind is prepared to see." I said nothing. "And we will not waste 5 good candles chasing a flaw in the first. 3 were too large." The empty curve matched, no recognized constellation, nor any path of the moon recorded in Alderwick. Aldrin brought out the previous year's table, then the table from 10 years before. Mara arranged them on the floor because the desk could not hold them all. The unknown curve remained absent. Near midnight, the clouds briefly opened. A patch of sky appeared through the southern shutter, and 3 true stars shone above the valley. Mara measured them while Aldrin checked the clock. The stars agreed with the official table. "There," Aldrin said. "Whatever we saw, it was not tonight's sky." That does not mean it was not a sky. Snow had stopped falling. Above the city, the clouds were parting into long gray islands, and stars appeared between them, one by one. Aldrin looked up. His eyes narrowed. For a moment, he seemed unable to find what he sought. Mara pointed toward the southern gate. "The lantern is there." The unknown candle remained locked in the tower behind them, and the copy of its impossible map waited in the dark. By morning, Aldrin had decided upon 3 ordinary explanations. The first was that smoke had followed old scratches in the plaster. The second was that someone at the Abbey had mixed a mineral into the wick, causing soot to gather oddly. The third was that exhaustion had encouraged 2 observers to mistake disorder for design. Mara listened to each explanation while warming her hands over the small brazier. "Which do you believe?" she asked. Belief is not needed when several explanations remain available. Within the hour, they had examined the dome with a ladder and a lamp. Its plaster bore stains, repairs, and hairline cracks, but none aligned with the copied constellations. They opened a second Abbey candle and split its wick. It held only twisted flax. Tobin, summoned from his workshop, inspected the brass holder and declared it innocent of all offenses except ugliness. "What pattern did the smoke make?" he asked. "A pattern resembling stars," Aldrin said. Mara unrolled the copy. Tobin studied it for a long moment. "That resembles stars in the way. My account book resembles wealth. This is no constellation I know." Nothing unusual happened. At last, Mara unwrapped the original candle. Its top had hardened into an uneven white bowl. She placed it at the center of the table and touched a taper to its wick. For several breaths, the flame was ordinary. Then it hissed. Smoke rose and bent toward the eastern wall. This time they were ready. Tobin closed every shutter and stood beside the clock with his hand on the minute lever. Mara spread clean paper over the table. Aldrin took the charcoal. As the smoke climbed, they marked the time. The same constellations gathered beneath the dome. They were clearer now. The crown appeared first, followed by the shepherd's staff, the field, and the sleeping fox. The strange dark path grew slowly between them. Mara copied from west to east. Aldrin called measurements, his old precision returning to his voice. Tobin read the clock at each change. Near the end of the curve, the smoke formed the empty ring again. But this time, within that ring, there was a point. It was faint and isolated, a star where none belonged. The candle went out at the same moment. The clock released its next tooth. Tobin stared upward. "I know only 5 constellations," he said. but I am reasonably certain Smoke should not know any. It seemed like movement. "Tomorrow," Aldrin said, "we will go to the archives." Its shelves began at the floor and vanished into a dimness of beams, ladders, boxes, and rolled civic maps. Sister Ivena kept the place with a calm that made even counselors lower their voices. She was not, in fact, a sister of the monastery. The title remained from years she had spent in a healing house when she was young, and Alderwick had never troubled to take it away. She wore plain gray wool, carried keys on a blue cord, and remembered where every document had been placed, even when it had been placed wrongly by someone else. When Aldrin, Mara, and Tobin arrived, she was repairing the spine of a rent ledger with a strip of linen. "3 visitors before the noon bell," she said. "Either the tower has fallen or Aldrin has discovered a number he dislikes." Mara unrolled the drawing. They told the story without embellishment. Aldrin described the first candle as a smoke irregularity. Mara described the constellations. Tobin supplied the times and emphasized that every shutter had been closed. None of them used the word magic. In Alderwick, sensible people often avoided that word, not because they disbelieved in wonder, but because naming a thing too quickly could prevent them from learning what it was. Ivena listened. When they finished, she placed 2 weights on the corners of the paper. "You want the almanacs," she said. "All winter observations from the last 50 years, Aldrin replied. "You want all of them today." Ivena had moved the surviving books upward and packed the empty space with boxes of dry sand. She unlocked the iron door and began passing out, narrow volumes bound in dark hide. Each annual record was smaller than Mara expected. A year of staring at the sky could be reduced to a book no thicker than a hand. The pages held columns of dates, angles, weather notes, and symbols that previous keepers had invented when ordinary words seemed too slow. They began with the most recent winter and worked backward. Mara searched for any star, following the unknown curve. Tobin looked for failures of the tower clock. Aldrin compared the position of the lantern and the crown. Ivena moved among them, supplying books, warming ink, and correcting their habit of leaving loose papers too close to the brazier. The first 10 years showed nothing. The next 10 differed only by the small changes Aldrin expected. At midday, Ivana brought bread, hard cheese, and a jar of pickled onions. They ate without leaving the table. By afternoon, Mara's eyes ached. She stood and walked to the far window, where the frozen garden lay colorless beneath the wall. Somewhere beyond the roofs, the Tower of Hours struck 3. The sound reached the archives softened by distance. When she returned, Aldrin was holding an open book from his first year as keeper. His face had gone still. "What is it?" she asked. He turned the volume so she could see. The entry for Deep Winter Day recorded a sighting of the lantern at an angle slightly east of the one in every later official table. The next entry, made 6 nights afterward, placed it west. Between the 2 pages, a narrow strip of parchment had been cut away close to the binding. Only a rough edge remained. Ivena leaned over Mara's shoulder. That was not recent. They had known each other for longer than Mara had been alive, and something passed between them that required no words. "There are apprentice books," Ivena said at last. "Not official records. Practice calculations, instrument lists, copied lectures. Most were never catalogued because most are useless. We came for observations. There were notebooks from 7 keepers and 23 assistants. Some contained only a few pages. Others had been filled, edge to edge. Aldrin's early hand appeared in 3. Neat at first, increasingly compressed as his confidence grew. They found no missing observation that day. They found his drawings of the old sighting frame. They found a complaint about the cold. They found a page on which Aldrin, aged 19, had written 3 possible ways to improve the water clock and had underlined the least practical one twice. Tobin read it and laughed until Ivina told him the archives had endured enough indignity. Near sunset, Mara discovered a small star drawn in the back margin of a lecture on seasonal drift. Beside it, young Aldrin had written, "A light seen only in reflection is not necessarily false." She showed him. He studied the sentence through the glass lens. "Do you remember it?" A short line remained near the binding. On it were 3 marks and half of a number. He closed that book too. "We need better copies of the smoke map," he said. It was not an answer, but it was a direction. They carried 6 selected volumes back to the tower with Ivina's reluctant permission. Each was wrapped in oiled cloth against the weather. By then the clouds had thinned, and a cold wind blew from the northern ridge, sweeping narrow lanes of stars into view. The next stage of their work lasted 9 nights. They did not light the strange candle immediately. Aldrin insisted that they first make an accurate observation of the real sky. The clock was checked against 2 sandglasses and a water vessel. Tobin marked each bell stroke on a board. Mara opened the dome shutters, and the winter air entered like clear water poured into the room. The tower's largest instrument was a brass quadrant fixed to the southern wall. It bore a sighting arm that could be raised until a chosen star appeared through 2 narrow plates. Mara had used it hundreds of times. That night, Aldrin asked her to take the first measurement. She aligned the lantern, waited for Tobin's count, and read the scale. "Again," Aldrin said. She repeated it. "Now the crown." When she stepped aside, he placed the glass lens before his right eye and tried to find the crown. The instrument moved a little too far, returned, and stopped. "Read it," he said. Mara leaned toward the scale. His position differed from hers by nearly a quarter degree. He adjusted the arm until the 2 readings agreed, though he could no longer see the star clearly enough to know that they did. Tobin busied himself at the clock. The kindness of pretending not to notice was all he could offer. After midnight, they closed the shutters and lit the candle. The smoke map returned. This time, Mara had prepared a grid on the survey paper. Tobin called the moments. Aldrin watched the dome and spoke the names of constellations as they appeared. They copied every point they could, then used the measured positions of plaster seams to correct their drawing. The empty path emerged more clearly. 40 faint marks lay along it, irregularly spaced. A brighter point appeared near one end. Near the other was a blurred cluster resembling 3 overlapping stars. The candle went out after 11 minutes. Mara compared the new drawing with the night's observations. The bright point lay close to the current position of the lantern, but not exactly upon it. The first mark on the curve lay near the position recorded in Aldrin's earliest official table. The final mark extended beyond the current table to a place where the lantern might stand years in the future if its slow shift continued. "A path through time," she said. Tobin rubbed his eyes. "Can smoke remember time?" The map returned, but the bright point appeared 1 mark farther along the curve. On the 3rd night, the map showed 2 bright points. On the 4th, it did not appear at all. They checked the wick, the room, and the clock. Aldrin grew irritable. Mara suggested that they had asked enough of the candle for one evening. Tobin suggested that Smoke, like any worker, deserved 1 night of rest. Aldrin sent him down to inspect the bell rope. On the 5th night, Sister Ivina climbed the tower, carrying a bundle of copied pages and a pot of stew. "You have forgotten that bodies require more than numbers," she said. They ate at the center table. The strange candle stood unlit between them, shortened now to half its first height. Ivana had found records from a neighboring abbey whose keeper had observed the lantern during the same early winter. His first position agreed with Aldrin's original uncorrected entry. "And his later position?" Mara asked. "There is none. A storm damaged the abbey roof. For 3 weeks, he recorded only the price of timber and his opinion of rain. One agreeing observation proves little. Selwyn trusted instruments he had built himself and distrusted any correction proposed by someone under 30. Ivina, then a novice in the healing house, often visited the tower because the healers kept the most reliable sandglasses in the city. "You and Selwyn disagreed about the lantern," she said. Eldrin looked toward the dark dome. "We disagreed about many things. I cannot remember which. You made a second observation," she said. "I must have." "Memory does not fail all at once," Ivina said. "It gives up its rooms one by one. You need not be ashamed because a door has closed." Ivana stood near the western desk, arms folded inside her sleeves. The flame caught. Smoke rose. The map formed more slowly than before, beginning not with the crown, but with the unknown curve. One by one, points appeared along it. Aldrin watched through the glass lens, though the lens could not have helped at that distance. When the bright point emerged, Mara marked it on the grid. Then, near the curve's beginning, the smoke gathered into a new shape, a shallow circle with a dark rim. Ivina drew in her breath. "The bowl," she said. The shape did resemble a vessel seen from above. From its center, 3 faint lines rose toward the earliest mark on the star path, and beside the bowl appeared another sign, one Mara had seen that afternoon in Aldrin's apprentice book, 3 short strokes followed by half a number. She pulled the book from beneath the official tables and opened it to the torn page. The remaining marks aligned with the smoke as neatly as 2 halves of a broken seal. "The candle is completing the missing line," she said. Tobin came closer. "Or the smoke saw the book." Mara looked from the path to the books spread around them. The irregular spaces were not the star's nightly movement. They were its recorded position from one winter to the next. The map held nearly 4 decades in a single image. She began matching points to tables. The earliest lay where Aldrin's first observation placed the lantern. The next 6 lay where the corrected tables placed it, almost unchanged. After that, the path resumed its natural curve, but because every keeper had begun with the correction, each later position carried a slight distortion. The error was small. A person could cover the difference with the width of a fingernail upon their chart. Yet across 40 years it had bent the recorded path away from the true one. Mara felt the discovery settle into her understanding. It did not arrive like a door thrown open. It arrived like dawn entering a room by degrees, revealing furniture that had always been there. "The map is not showing a star that does not exist," she said. "It is showing the lantern as it was seen, and as it should have been seen. Most would change by only a day." The opening of the upper channels, calculated from the star's relation to the late winter moon and corrected by snow depth, would move farther. Perhaps 7 days, perhaps 10. That year, the upland snow was deeper than usual. Tobin saw what she was calculating. "Corin has already sent the fair dates to the guilds." "No, but half the city behaves as if wax seals arrive before ink. That is repetition, not proof." "From the eastern roof," she said. Eldrin nodded. Outside, the cloud cover had returned. Snow brushed the shutters with the sound of a hand across cloth. They would need a clear sky. Until it came, the question would remain open. During the next 4 days, Alderwick continued preparing for the spring fair. Carpenters repaired market stalls. Dyers hung sample ribbons beneath the guild arcade, where they moved in the cold air like narrow flags. Bakers tested spice cakes that would keep through the final weeks of winter. Steward Corin sent 3 messages to the tower, asking when he might receive the table of measures. Aldrin answered the first 2 by saying the observations were incomplete. He did not answer the third. Corin came in person. He was a tall, spare man whose official robes never seemed to gather dust, even in the tower stair. He climbed without complaint and arrived in the observatory breathing only a little harder than usual. A leather folio rested beneath one arm. "Master Mir," he said. "Mistress Fen." "Master Rusk." It has been clouded in previous winters. There is an uncertainty in the position of the lantern. The millers will object. He could have explained the missing page, the old sighting, and the curved path through 40 winters. Instead, he said, "An inconsistency in the records. Then I will decide what the available evidence justifies." "Why did you not tell him?" "She is not asking whether the case is finished. She is asking why you told him so little." Mara felt anger rise, but beneath it was something less simple. She had admired this man since she was 18. He had taught her to distrust easy conclusions, to repeat measurements, to mark uncertainty honestly in the margins. Now, when those lessons pointed toward his own mistake, he behaved as if caution belonged only to him. "If the next observation confirms the map," she said, "will you correct the table?" She walked south through the market, past stalls roofed in snow and workers hanging garlands that would remain green until the fair. The city appeared peaceful in its preparations. No one looking at it would imagine that 9 days could matter. Yet days were not empty boxes. A miller hired hands for a date. A shepherd planned a descent from the hills. A merchant left home, early enough to reach Alderwick before the gates grew crowded. The table did not command their lives, but it entered them quietly. At the southern Channel House, workers were already scraping moss from the gate wheels. Mara stopped on the bridge and looked down. The channel beneath was dry. Beyond the city wall, its stone bed climbed toward the white hills, waiting for the measured release of meltwater. She thought of the smoke path, bending away from truth by the width of a fingernail. Small errors, given time, could travel farther than anyone intended. When she returned to the tower after dark, she found Aldrin alone beneath the dome. The strange candle was lit. Smoke had gathered above him, but he was not copying it. He stood with both hands on the table and watched the path form. "You said we should save what remains," Mara said. "I know." At the beginning of the path, the shape of the bowl appeared. Beside it, the incomplete number darkened and faded. "Yes," Aldrin said. Mara came beside him. "I do not remember making the correction," he said. "Not truly. I remember arguing with Selwyn. I remember the eastern roof in winter. I remember carrying a bowl, though perhaps I remember Ivina telling me that I carried it. Memory can borrow its own reflection." Without the sternness of concentration, his face appeared tired and old. "If I was wrong," he said, "the truth will not only correct a number, it will change the story of how I came to this tower. Then tell it correctly next time." Cloud pressed low upon the hills, hiding even the upper part of the tower when seen from the market. Snow softened the city's roofs and filled the steps along the northern slope. The bell sounded from inside, a white silence, each stroke rounder and nearer than usual. Mara used the waiting time to prepare. The Eastern Watch Station had not held a permanent guard for nearly 60 years. Its roof remained sound, but no fixed sighting frame stood there. She selected a portable measuring rule from the tower cupboard, a plumb line, 2 lantern screens, charcoal, a sand glass, and a folding tripod. Tobin had made for surveying roof angles. Each item was inspected, tested, and packed in wool. Tobin measured the delay of the tower bell from the eastern wall. He sent his apprentice to stand at the old station with a small hand flag while Mara watched from the tower. They compared the flag movement with the arrival of the sound and agreed upon a correction. The delay was less than 2 breaths. Aldrin insisted they measure it 3 times. "If we are wrong," he said, "let it not be because we were lazy in an obvious place." On the second afternoon, Sister Ivena returned with a flat parcel wrapped in linen. "I found this in the bindery chest," she said. Inside lay 3 strips of old parchment. They were narrow and mottled with glue. A bookbinder had once cut them from unwanted pages, and used them to strengthen the spine of a rent register. During repairs made years later, Ivena had removed the strips and kept them because she recognized Aldrin's handwriting. She had forgotten them until she began searching every bundle from his apprentice years. The first strip held a row of weather signs. The second held half of a calculation. On the third were 2 star positions, both crossed once and rewritten. Mara placed the strip beside the torn apprentice page. The fibers matched along one edge. Aldrin did not touch it. "There are 2 readings," Mara said. "Yes." Below that, Aldrin had written, "Repeat before choosing." No repeated observation followed. Tobin read the line over Mara's shoulder. He did not make a joke. "Why was the page used for binding?" Mara asked. Ivena shook her head. "Apprentice papers were discarded by the basket. It may have been torn accidentally. It may have been removed because the calculation was thought useless. There were clouds along the valley, but the lantern stood above them. I meant to return the following night. It was not because the night itself had vanished. Aldrin had remembered its ambition more clearly than its numbers, and had spent years looking away from the part that did not fit the story he preferred. "You chose the reflected light," she said. "I chose the cleaner answer. What made the southern rim bright?" When she opened her window, the clouds above Alderwick had broken into long, moving bands. Between them shone a sky of dark blue, not yet morning and no longer holy night. She dressed without lighting her lamp and hurried to the tower. Aldrin was already there. He wore his oldest winter coat and had packed the copper bowl in a basket lined with straw. Tobin arrived soon afterward, carrying the tripod across one shoulder and a loaf of bread beneath his arm. "No one observes wisely on an empty stomach," he said. Sister Ivena did not join them. She claimed the archives had no interest in climbing walls before sunrise, but she gave Mara a small flask of hot mint water and told Aldrin to remember that ice respected neither reputation nor rank. The 3 set out while the city slept. They descended the northern hill, crossed the silent market, and followed the inside of the eastern wall. Snow lay ridged against doorways. A baker's chimney had begun to smoke, and the scent of the first loaves drifted into the lane. At the channel bridge, ice shone between the empty stone banks. Aldrin walked slowly, but refused Mara's arm. Tobin carried most of the instruments without mentioning that he had taken them from the older man's basket. The watch station was reached by a stair built into the wall. Its lower steps were sheltered, but the upper flight held a thin skin of ice. Mara climbed first, clearing each tread with the edge of a wooden scraper. Tobin followed with the tripod. Aldrin came last, one hand on the wall and the other gripping the rail. At the top, the city opened beneath them. The roofs of Alderwick descended in pale layers toward the valley. The Tower of Hours stood on the northern hill, its dome dark against the broken clouds. Beyond the southern wall, fields lay under snow, divided by hedges and low stone boundaries. The uplands rose farther away, white on their highest slopes. The eastern roof itself was a broad platform enclosed by a waist-high parapet. A small guardroom opened behind it. Its door hung crooked, and sparrows had built nests among the rafters. Mara set the tripod near the place described in Aldrin's old notes. Tobin leveled it with thin wooden wedges. They fixed the portable rule to its top and tested the plumb line. The lantern would cross their chosen sight line shortly after full darkness that evening. They had arrived early because Aldrin wanted daylight to inspect every possible source of error. They examined the parapet, the angle toward the southern horizon, and the copper bowl. The bowl was not the one Aldrin had used as an apprentice. That vessel had disappeared years ago. This one came from the tower cupboard and had been polished until its inner surface held a dull red glow. Tobin placed it on the parapet. "Southern rim bright," he read from Mara's copy of the old note. Morning light touched the rim. A narrow reflection appeared in the water. although the bowl was still empty. The copper itself could have caught a light, Mara said. At night, Selwyn kept a lamp in that window so I could time the observation to his signal. Mara remained at the station with Aldrin. They shared the loaf and mint water in the guard room while the day passed. It was the longest uninterrupted time they had spent together away from the tower. Without instruments between them, conversation came reluctantly. They spoke first of roofs. Mara described working with her father, who could hear a loose tile in the sound of rain. Aldrin told her. He had once wanted to build clocks, until he discovered that he cared less for making time move than for understanding what moved through it. Outside, clouds crossed the sun and changed the room from gray to gold and back again. "Did you mean to recommend me?" Mara asked. The question had waited too long to become more graceful. Aldrin held the bread knife in one hand. "As keeper? Someone with an established name. They would see 6 years of your work beneath my seal. You cannot hide my work inside your reputation and call that proof of mine." I did not understand that the two purposes opposed one another. Corrin expected Aldrin to present either a completed table or a reason for delay. "Then tonight is generous in its timing," Aldrin said. "Tonight has not promised us a star," Tobin replied. Indeed, as sunset approached, clouds gathered again along the southern horizon. The wind drove them eastward, but new bands followed. The three observers prepared the instruments under a sky that seemed unable to decide whether it would open. They filled the copper bowl from the flask. The water shivered, and Tobin built a short screen from spare boards to shield it from the wind. Mara aligned the sighting rule with the fixed mark on the southern ridge. At the Tower of Hours, a tiny lamp appeared in the observatory window. Tobin's apprentice uncovered it, covered it, and uncovered it again, according to their signal. Mara looked into the bowl. There, along the southern rim, a small golden point trembled in the reflection. It stood very near the false position in Aldrin's old correction. Tobin leaned over from the other side. A star belonging to a tower. Mara steadied the bowl while he looked. The reflected lamp was brighter than it appeared across the city. Curvature stretched it into a trembling spark. If clouds had passed behind it, a young observer expecting a star could easily have taken it for one. "Selwyn signaled twice," Aldrin said. "I remember now. I had seen the first position directly, but when I looked into the water, his lamp appeared where his table placed the lantern. I believed the agreement proved him right. The false star vanished. Nothing remained in the bowl but clouds. They had discovered the old error. They still needed the true position. Night gathered. The tower lamp was extinguished. The southern clouds thickened until even the ridgeline disappeared. They waited. The cold deepened slowly, entering boots, gloves, and the seams of their coats. Mara turned the sandglass at each interval. Tobin walked the length of the platform to keep feeling in his feet. Aldrin sat wrapped in one of the blankets, his face toward the hidden sky. An hour passed. From the city came the smell of wood smoke and supper. Lamps appeared behind shutters. The bell marked the first hour of night. Another hour passed. The clouds lowered. Fine grains of snow touched the parapet. "We should return tomorrow," Tobin said. "The council meets at morning," Aldrin replied. "The council possesses mornings in abundance." To pass the time, Tobin told them how he had once repaired a clock for a man who refused to admit it had stopped. Each day, the man moved the hands to the correct hour himself, so visitors would not know. He continued for 6 months, rising in the night to adjust it, until Tobin pointed out that he had become the clock. Aldrin laughed, softly at first, and then with genuine amusement. "Did he let you repair it?" Mara asked. "No. He sold the house." The long shape of the sleeping fox lay across the darkness. The lantern remained hidden. Mara took positions of every visible star. Tobin read the time. Aldrin recorded her numbers by touch, writing large enough that he could see the ink. The cloud edge moved east. For one breath, a bright point shone through a thinning veil above the southern ridge. Then it vanished. "Was that it?" Tobin asked. "No," Mara said. "Too low. I mend clocks." The lantern's reflection appeared in the dark water, farther from the southern rim than the tower lamp had been. Aldrin knelt. Mara guided his hand to the edge of the bowl. "Look near the center, slightly east." He did not speak for several breaths. "I see it," he said. The words held no triumph and no defeat, only recognition. Mara marked the position. It agreed with the path in the candle smoke. It agreed with Aldrin's first entry. It agreed with the old Abbey record. It did not agree with 38 signed tables. Cloud covered the star. The water in the bowl became black. Tobin packed the instrument while Mara checked the figures by lantern light. There was no need to wait for another opening. They had 3 readings from 2 observers, an independent location, a tested clock correction, and the reflection Aldrin himself had seen. The question of the star was settled. What remained was the question of the man. They descended the wall after midnight. Ice had begun forming again on the steps. Aldrin accepted Mara's arm this time. At the bottom, he turned and looked back toward the dark watch station. 40 years, he said. The star did not mind, Tobin replied. People may. Their footsteps sounded small between the walls. At the Channel Bridge, Aldrin stopped. The dry stone course disappeared northward beneath snow. If the old table were used, the upper gates would open while the shaded slopes still held deep frost. The water would not destroy the city. It might overflow a lower bank, damage seedlings, or turn a millyard to mud. More likely, the crews would see the danger and close the gates again. The error was not a hidden disaster waiting to make the truth dramatic. It was simply an error that no longer needed to continue. 9 days, Mara said. She had completed the new calculation at the station. Aldrin nodded. 9 days. They climbed the northern hill. In the observatory, dawn was beginning to pale the eastern shutters. The strange candle stood on the center table, scarcely 2 fingers high. Aldrin unwrapped it and placed it in the brass holder. We have no need to burn it again, Mara said. No, he answered. We do not. Then he drew the unsigned table of measures toward him, placed a clean sheet beside it, and handed Mara the pen. Write the corrected positions, he said. In my hand? When they reached the opening of the upper channels, Mara wrote the later day. No thunder sounded. No star moved from its course. Morning entered the tower, as it had on thousands of mornings before. Yet when Aldrin placed his name beneath the calculation, he did not write Keeper of the Tower. He wrote Observer. Below it, he left a second line. Mara looked at the blank space. For the confirming observer, he said. She signed her name. The city bell began to strike dawn beneath them. They had just enough time to wash the charcoal from their hands before the council assembled. The council chamber stood above the western market gate. Its windows overlooked the square where workers were building the fair stalls. From within, the hammering below sounded like distant rain. 9 councillors sat at a curved oak table. They represented the water wardens, the guilds, the market, the outer farms, and the city household. Behind them stood clerks with sharpened pens. Steward Corrin occupied the center chair, not as ruler, but as the person expected to keep everyone speaking of the same subject. Aldrin had appeared before them many times. He usually stood alone, placed the completed table of measures on the reading stand, answered 3 familiar questions, and waited while the seal was warmed. This morning, Mara stood at his right and Tobin at his left. Sister Evina had come from the archives carrying the old records in a locked case. The corrected table lay open before them. Corrin looked at the 2 signatures. You have reached a decision, he said. "We have reached a measurement," Aldrin replied. "The decision belongs partly to you." He presented the neighboring abbey's observation, the recovered parchment strip, and the new readings from the eastern roof. Mara described their instruments and repeated the numbers. Tobin confirmed the clock and sound corrections. Aldrin did not begin with the candle. He wanted the council to understand that the corrected table did not rest upon smoke. The smoke had opened the question. Ordinary observation had answered it. When all the measurements had been explained, Corrin folded his hands. "What drew your attention to an entry nearly 40 years old?" Each would have sounded sensible and preserved most of what he feared losing. Instead, he said, "A candle filled the observatory dome with a map made of smoke." The master of millers closed his eyes briefly, as if an inconvenience he had anticipated had arrived in a form more imaginative than necessary. Corrin's expression did not change. "A map," he said, "of the winter sky. It showed the lantern's recorded path across 40 years, including the deviation caused by my correction." "Because a candle smoked?" "The delay rests upon 3 new observations from the eastern wall, checked against the tower clock, compared with an independent abbey record, and calculated from the current snow depth. If the smoke had shown us nothing, the measurements would still be true. If it had shown us nonsense, we would have discarded it." "And if your measurements are wrong?" The water warden asked whether the lower cisterns could supply households during the delay. Tobin answered questions about the bell timing. Mara explained the snow correction. Aldrin listened, speaking only when the question concerned the old table. At last, the oldest counselor, a wool merchant with white eyebrows, looked at Aldrin. "Did you falsify the first record?" Aldrin considered the word carefully. "I did not write a position I knew to be false," he said. "I chose between 2 readings. I chose the one that agreed with my master and with the inherited table. My instruction to myself was to repeat the observation before choosing. I did not do so, and I mistook agreement for proof. There is no sign that Master Mir hid it after becoming keeper." 2 counselors argued over responsibility for informing merchants already on the road. The miller proposed opening the lower gates, early to compensate. The water warden refused. A clerk asked whether the phrase candle smoke must appear in the official record, and looked deeply relieved when Corrin said the minutes would state anomalous observation. Yet no one demanded that the old table remain merely because it was old. By the noon bell, the council agreed. The opening of the upper channels would be delayed 9 days. The spring fair would begin 5 days later than planned, allowing upland merchants time to adjust. The lower cistern ration would remain unchanged. Notices would be posted at every gate and sent by mounted courier to the nearest towns. Then Corrin reached for the city seal. He paused above Aldrin's signature. "The title is missing," he said. "Deliberately," Aldrin replied. "You remain keeper until the council appoints another. My office does not make it truer." A baker asked Tobin whether the fair cakes would keep 5 more days. "If they do not," he said, "I will accept the burden of testing them." A miller's wife told him that her husband would complain until the water arrived, and for several days afterward, but that this should not be mistaken for opposition. A shepherd from the outer farms thanked Mara for the later date, because the north slope remained too icy for lambs. Others were less kind. A young merchant, whose dyed cloth was already packed for the fair, asked whether the keeper planned to repay every inn fee caused by his wandering star. An elderly man near the fountain said that if the tables had been wrong for 40 years and the city still stood, perhaps accuracy was an expensive habit. Aldrin listened to both and made no defense beyond explaining where revised notices could be found. By evening, the story had divided into many versions. In one, Aldrin had discovered a new star that demanded 9 days of worship. In another, Mara had read the future in a candle and frightened the council. A third claimed that Tobin's clock had been slow for 40 years, which offended him more than all the others. Sister Ivena wrote a clear account and posted it outside the archives. Few people read the whole page, but enough did to correct the worst inventions. The city entered its 9 days of patience. At first, the delay felt larger than it was. Empty dates seem broad when a plan has been removed from them. The market stalls stood ready, but unoccupied. Garlands waited beneath damp cloth. The channel crews, who had expected to climb to the upper gates, spent 2 days repairing lower walls and replacing worn handles. Then life filled the space. The bakers made fresh batches instead of trusting cakes already stored. Dyers used the extra days to finish cloth. They had thought too late for the fair. A potter whose cart. Axel had broken beyond the western hill, reached Alderwick before the market opened, and told everyone the revised notice had saved him from abandoning half his wares beside the road. Children found the unoccupied stalls. Ideal for games until Corin stationed a clerk there, after which they found them even more ideal. At the tower, the work changed as well. Aldrin and Mara reviewed every entry in the new table of measures. For the first time, Mara's calculations were not copied into Aldrin's hand before being made official. She wrote them herself. Beside each final position, they added the source of the observation, the instrument used, and the name of the person who confirmed it. Tobin devised a small wooden frame that allowed 2 observers to set independent marks without seeing each other's answer. He was proud of its simplicity and offended when Mara suggested that a folded cloth might accomplish the same thing. "A cloth has no gears," he said. "Neither does your frame." "A page of errors," Tobin said. "A page of choices," Ivina corrected. Aldrin placed his old parchment strip at the front. On the 3rd day, he went to the market without his keeper's chain. The chain was a modest thing, made of bronze links with a small silver star at the center. He had worn it for official occasions since his appointment. That morning he left it in its box and walked to the southern channel house in an ordinary brown coat. Mara went with him. The water warden showed them the lower gates and the marks, measuring snowmelt from previous years. Aldrin had used those numbers for decades, but he had rarely stood beside the channel itself. He ran his hand along the dry stone and listened as the warden explained how cold water behaved when released too quickly over frozen ground. "The table gives us a day," the warden said. "The hill gives us the hour. Mostly is why we have gate crews." "From the tower," he said, "the city appears to be made of roofs." On the 4th evening, the sky cleared completely. Mara opened the observatory dome and took the lantern's position from the tower. Aldrin observed through the water bowl. Tobin made the confirming measurement. All 3 readings agreed with the corrected path. They did not light the strange candle. It stood within the cupboard, wrapped in linen. Only a small amount remained, and Mara had begun to think of it less as an instrument than as a question that should not be asked merely to hear the same answer. On the 5th day, Steward Corin climbed the tower. He examined the new record book, Tobin's frame, and the double signatures. Aldrin showed him the proposed rules for future tables. Every seasonal position affecting civic dates would be observed independently by 2 trained people. If their readings differed beyond an agreed measure, a 3rd observation would be made from another site. Discarded readings would be preserved with reasons. No apprentice's work would disappear beneath a keeper's signature. Corin read the rules slowly. "You are designing an office that trusts no keeper," he said. "I am designing one that need not distrust a keeper," Aldrin replied. "There is a difference? The tower should also take a new apprentice before summer." Tobin brought his apprentice from the clock shop, a quiet boy of 17 who could identify every bell gear by its sound but had never looked through a sighting plate. Ivena sent 2 archive assistants who knew the celestial records better than many observers, but had seen most stars only as ink. Aldrin sat near the western window with a blanket across his knees and said he intended merely to listen. Mara began with the instrument. She did not tell the three learners where the fixed mark should fall. She showed them how to level the tripod, how to wait for the plumb line to become still, and how to read the engraved scale without touching the arm. Then she hung a cloth between the instrument and the record table so that each observer would write a result without seeing the others. Tobin looked at his wooden frame standing unused beside the wall. "I continue to believe timber would improve this method," he said. "You may believe so independently," Mara replied. The first exercise used the point of the southern gate tower rather than a star. It was visible in daylight and did not move while beginners learned where to place their hands. Tobin's apprentice took a reading. One archive assistant followed. The second assistant went last. Mara gathered their folded slips and placed them side by side. Two agreed closely. The third differed by almost half a degree. The assistant who had written it flushed. "I will do it again." The apprentice stood too far from the citing plate, but had compensated consistently. The first archive assistant had followed the instruction precisely. The second placed her hand on the tripod while reading. When she touched it again, one wooden foot rocked slightly against the uneven floor. Tobin knelt and found a worn patch beneath the leg. "The tower is guilty. Beside it, we write what caused the difference and why we did not use it in the final measure." They took their positions separately. No one rushed. The archive assistants, who had copied thousands of star names, grew quiet when they saw those names become points of light above the open dome. Tobin's apprentice discovered that he knew the goose after all, though it was not the cloud his master had once claimed. Aldrin listened to their numbers. Once, when an assistant confused the upper and lower scale, he drew breath to correct her. Then he waited while Mara asked the question that allowed the woman to find the mistake herself. Later, when the learners had descended, Mara found him examining their slips. "You gave them more time than Selwyn gave me," he said. "I had a reason." The results, including the discarded one, formed a small record of the afternoon. Agreement, difference, investigation, correction. "You knew the tripod was unsteady," he said. "I suspected." Evening had deepened, and the lantern was beginning to show above the southern roofs. "That belongs in the rules," he said. "It is too long for a rule." The tower had already begun to belong to people who had never known it only as Aldrin's. After the lesson, Aldrin remained by the western window. "You said we. 3 shirts, 2 winter coats, a wooden comb, a tin cup, 7 books, a box of letters, and a pair of boots he had not worn in years. The rest belonged to the office: charts, tools, blankets, lamps, and the narrow bed built into the wall. Mara helped him pack. He gave her a small brass compass used not for finding north, but for drawing circles on charts. Its points were worn, and one arm had been repaired with a darker metal. "Selwyn gave this to me," he said, "before or after you disagreed about the lantern. He did not keep the bronze chain." On the 7th day, snow slid from the northern roofs in long, soft collapses. Water ran through gutters. The streets smelled of wet earth beneath old straw. Upland messengers reported that the shaded banks remained firm, but the south-facing slopes had begun to release their snow. The water warden recommended keeping the revised date. The millers stopped objecting publicly. Privately, they saved their objections in case the water arrived weak. On the 8th day, the spring fair merchants began entering the city. Their carts carried wool, salt, dried apples, iron tools, lamp oil, and bolts of cloth. Inns filled. Music appeared in the market before anyone had hired it. The delayed garlands were uncovered and remained green. A potter set out small bowls glazed the color of midnight. When Mara passed his stall, she stopped. Each bowl held a scattering of white points beneath its dark surface. "Star bowls," the potter said, inspired by recent civic confusion. "The stars are not placed correctly. Alderwick's builders had shaped the place generations earlier, using walls and wooden sluices to slow the spring water before sending it toward the city. The mechanism was simple, heavy, and scarred by use. Snow still lay beneath the pines. In open places, grass had emerged in flattened yellow patches. The reservoir was full, but not pressing dangerously against its wall. The water warden inspected the gates, measured the stream, and waited for the sun to reach a mark cut into the eastern stone. No ceremony had been planned, yet everyone fell silent when the moment came. 4 workers took hold of the wheel bars. The warden gave a signal. Wood groaned. The first gate lifted by the width of a palm. Water entered the channel. It did not rush. It curled over the stone lip, clear and dark, carrying small pieces of ice. The workers raised the gate. Another measure. The flow strengthened and moved southward, following the long, empty bed toward Alderwick. Aldrin watched it go. 9 days, he said. Corin stood beside him. Was the delay necessary? 9 days ago, I would have opened only half this width. News traveled ahead by runner, and the water moved through the uplands in measured stages. By late afternoon, it reached the southern wall. People had gathered along the city channel to watch. Children leaned over the bridge until parents caught their belts. Millers inspected the depth with the solemnity of priests. The first water entered the lower course, darkening pale stones and carrying away the winter's dust. It reached the mill quarter at sunset. The nearest wheel turned once, paused, and turned again. Water filled its paddles. The axle gave a low wooden groan, then settled into rhythm. No wall broke, no field flooded, no great danger announced that the correction had been righteous. The water simply arrived when the ground was ready to receive it. That was enough. Long after the crowd left the channel bridge, Mara returned to the observatory alone. The climb felt different now. The same stair curved through the same stone, yet each landing seemed to ask what she would place there and what she would leave unchanged. She lit an ordinary tallow lamp, opened the southern shutter, and listened. Far below, the newly released water moved through Alderwick. She could not see the whole channel from any one window. Between houses, it appeared as brief silver pieces, a line beside the gardens, a bright turn near the wall, a glimmer beneath the mill bridge. Together, the pieces formed a route through the city, though roofs and darkness concealed most of it. Mara understood why people trusted maps. A map offered the comfort of seeing connections that the ground allowed only one at a time, but it could also make those connections seem finished. It could hide the workers at the gates, the thawing banks, the repaired wheel, and every choice that allowed water to travel safely from hill to mill. She opened the new record book and read the 2 signatures beneath the corrected date. Then she added a final note in the margin. Water received at the southern wall near sunset. Banks held. Gate crews report steady flow. The table had predicted a day. The note recorded what the day had actually brought. Mara closed the book and stood for a while at the shutter. No smoke marked the dome. No impossible sign offered another instruction. The tower held only lamplight, instruments, and the distant sound of moving water. She found that she did not feel abandoned by the wonder. Some questions opened a door. Afterward, ordinary work was how one walked through it. The spring fair opened the following morning. Bells sounded from the gate towers. Merchants raised their awnings. Bread, wool, copper, herbs, and colored glass filled the square. The city's winter quiet gave way to bargaining, greetings, and the steady movement of people who had waited long enough to begin. Aldrin attended without his chain. For the first time in decades, no one asked him for a date. He bought a paper cone of roasted hazelnuts and sat near the fountain with Sister Evina. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Noisy." At noon, Steward Corin found Mara near the instrument maker's stall. He handed her a sealed letter. The council had appointed her keeper of measures for a term of 3 years. The title was slightly different from Aldrin's old one. Responsibility for the great clock would remain formally with Tobin, while the celestial records, calendar, and training of observers would belong to Mara. Every annual table would require a confirming signature from someone outside her office. The council had accepted Aldrin's rules. Mara read the letter twice. 3 years, she said. The council has learned caution, Corin replied. So have I. She crossed the square and handed him the letter. He held it at arm's length, then used the glass lens. Keeper of measures, he said, for 3 years. Mistress Fenn. Mara took the first observation as keeper. Tobin took the second. Aldrin wrote neither number, but he watched them enter both in the new book. Before they descended, Mara opened the cupboard. The last piece of the strange candle lay in its linen wrapping. Its wick was bent and black. There was enough wax for only a few minutes. Should we keep it? She asked. Tobin considered. For what? Mara placed the candle in the brass holder and lit it. The flame rose low and golden. For a minute, it burned cleanly. Then a narrow thread of smoke climbed toward the dome. No one reached for paper. The smoke spread beneath the white plaster. The crown appeared. The shepherd's staff followed. The field of wheat and the sleeping fox gathered from the gray. Between them curved the path of the lantern. The old deviation was still visible, a small bend through years of inherited error. But the bright point now rested upon the corrected line. Beyond it, the smoke traced several faint marks into the future. At the end of the path appeared an empty ring. Mara understood that the map was not promising what the next observer would find. It was leaving room for the finding. The candle burned down to its final pool of wax. The map faded. Aldrin stood beneath it, with his face lifted, no lens before his eyes. Perhaps he saw only the broadest shapes. Perhaps that was enough. A map should tell you where to look, he said. It should not tell you what you are permitted to see. Smoke rose from the extinguished wick, joined the fading path overhead, and disappeared. They left the brass holder on the center table. In the years that followed, Mara served as keeper of measures in the Tower of Hours, with 2 pens ready beside every final page. Tobin trained apprentices to check the clock and pretended to be surprised whenever they improved one of his devices. Sister Ivena preserved uncertain observations with the same care she gave official ones. Aldrin visited often, though he learned to knock before entering the observatory that had once seemed inseparable from himself. He taught young observers how to use a water bowl when their eyes were tired. He always warned them to cover the tower lamps first. The story of the smoke map became less accurate as it traveled, as stories do. Some said it predicted floods. Some said it wrote Mara's name among the stars. Some claimed the candle had burned for 40 nights instead of a handful of minutes. Within the tower, the account remained simpler. A question appeared. Several people followed it. A mistake was corrected. The work continued. And whenever the annual table was carried to the council, the first signature belonged to the keeper, the second to another observer, and beneath them both were written the words, "Repeat before choosing." Beside the tavern fire, the storyteller fell silent. During the telling, the candle at the end of the long table had burned nearly to the pewter dish. Its smoke no longer clung beneath the beam. The carter who had seen roads there first was resting with his chin upon his folded arms. The older traveler, who had seen rivers, had closed his eyes. Near the hearth, the woman who had called it a map of stars watched the last flame with a peaceful expression. Outside, frost still held the road, but the night had deepened toward morning. Somewhere beyond the shutters, the true stars continued along paths. No table could own. The innkeeper came to snuff the candle. Before he could, the storyteller lifted one hand. They waited. The flame sank into its little circle of wax. It brightened once, not enough to disturb anyone, and then went out by itself. A grey thread rose from the wick. For an instant, it bent beneath the beam and formed a single curve. A point of darkness rested at one end. At the other was a small empty space, round and clear, as if left for a star that had not yet been observed. Then the smoke loosened. It became only smoke again, drifting upward into the warm shadows of the tavern. The storyteller drew another piece of wood over the coals. The fire answered with a quiet glow. No moral was added, for none was needed. The table held its sleeping travelers. The bread remained beneath its cloth. The cups waited to be gathered in the morning, and high above the roof, unseen but neither lost nor forgotten, the lantern moved through the winter sky,